So let's go ahead and create a networked entity. The skeleton project comes with an example entity.js in-game classes, and it is, I believe, already loaded. No, it's not. So okay, so let's go into our server config file and just add an entry for this. So let's call it example entity and tell the engine where to look for it. So game classes example entity. We also need to load it on the client as well. So let's go into our client config and do the same thing. Now you'll notice on your server config that we had a name as well as a path, and we didn't bother adding .js. I mean, you can if you want to, but Node already knows it's loading a JavaScript file, so you don't really need to do that. On the client side, we don't give it a name, we just load it straight away, and we do provide a .js, and that's because you're effectively calling it, you're asking for it from the web server, so it does actually need to know the proper full path and name of the file. Right, let's go back to our server.js, let's go to example entity. So in here you can see it's just a skeleton file at the moment. Right, let's go ahead and give it a texture, because we're going to be creating one of these in a minute and we want it to show it on screen. So I believe there's already an example player texture in the assets folder here, and if we go into client.js, I believe it's loaded. Yes, it is, as textures.ship. So on initialization of this entity, if we're not running on the server, you should never initialize entity textures on the server, because they don't actually exist. The server doesn't load textures, doesn't know about textures, has no interest in them at all. So we just say that this flag IGE is server just is a boolean, true or false, and if it's running on the server, it'll be true, and if it's running on the client, it'll be false. So we're just checking that it's false, because this class will be instantiated on both client and server side, and therefore we need to make sure that the code executes perfectly in both environments. So if not server, then we're going to provide a texture for this. So we'll say this.texture is IGE.client. This allows you to access the client instance. So if you look, we're here, we're in client, and this instance is created by the engine when it loads client, which is a standard class that has to be loaded by your game. So if we go back to our example entity, we're going to do .client, .textures, .ship, and that will provide us with the texture we want. .textures, .ship, and there we go. We'll also, I think we probably want to give a width and a height to our entity. So .width, let's just say 50 pixels, and the same for height. The texture, the ship texture is actually a smart texture. It's a JS file, and if you look, all it's doing is drawing a triangle using the standard canvas path and stroke methods. If you are not familiar with the canvas methods that are doing this, you can have a look on MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, or just Google it. You'll find lots of information about that. And we'll cover in much more detail the smart texture system at a later time. But suffice it to say that if you're creating a smart texture, you need to create an object called image in all cases with a render method. And the render method will pass the context of the canvas and the entity object that the texture relates to, and that allows you to draw anything you want onto the canvas context. The context will already be transformed to the center of your entity, so you can literally just start drawing and you'll know that you're drawing at the right place for that entity. Anyway, so let's go back to our entity. So we've given it a texture now, and let's just save that and see if we can get that working on the client. So in order to load your client, you always need your server running. So first of all, let's just run the server again. Let's grab our example and load. That's all fine and working. Now in our client.js, sorry, in our server.js, because we're creating it server side, let's just go ahead and create a new example entity. We're going to give it an ID as well, xent, so we can reference it later if required. And we also want to mount that entity to the base scene. So IGE dollar base scene. IGE.dollar is kind of like jQuery. You don't put a hash because it's always IDs, and it's the ID of the object. We load base scene is already loaded, as I said earlier, in IGE base scene, which is like just loads a base scene object and a viewport, as I mentioned earlier. So that's how you grab the base scene, and we are mounting this entity to the base scene, and that's done on the server. Now, if we were to reload the server now, okay, so that's actually mounted it now. You load it on a client, and you still won't see the entity. And the reason for that is that entities only exist on the server until you tell it to start streaming that entity. So in here, we're just going to put stream mode 1. Now, stream mode 1 just means it's automatic. As soon as a client connects, it'll automatically start streaming data about this entity to that client. So here we go. Let's reload the server again. All right, and there we are. Our entity is there because we've reconnected, but let's just refresh so you can see that happen again. And there's our entity. Now you notice this was entirely on the server side. If you have a look at client.js, it does not exist here at all. We haven't done anything, created any entities here at all. So it's all automatic, all instantaneous, and you can even see the client has acknowledged that it has created an entity from the stream entity created with ID xent. And now if we look at our scene graph, you'll see it there. So we've got our base scene and xent. If we click on this, it'll actually show you the axis aligned bounding box around that entity. Okay. Now, the next stage in this tutorial is going to show you just a little bit on how we can create some streaming effects with translation. So we're going to actually tween the translate from left to right, and then we'll see that occurring on the client. In fact, all the clients we're going to connect a few of them and show it happening synchronized in real time.